So I'm like delighted to be here, although we're not together. But it's a pleasure to join you and to have the opportunity to talk to you about some of the work that I recently published. Um, I'm going to speak to you about the book that came out last year called Consumer Activism, which summarizes the research that I've done since I started my PhD, really. So I did my PhD in the late 2000s. I finished in 2010. And from that time onwards, I have continued to develop some of the investigation lines on consumer politics. I actually have a first degree. Sorry.
Ok. Então, ela começa falando que ela está contente de estar aqui e dizer que ela vai tratar basicamente do livro que ela lançou no ano passado, que trata da pesquisa que ela começou a desenvolver no doutorado, que ela terminou em 2010, e que focaliza a cultura promocional e a política. Please.
Okay. I have a PowerPoint presentation. I wonder if I could share that.
Oh, of course. Just a minute. Let me make you co-host. Okay. And Hiller, I'm going to make you co-host as well. If there's any glitch with my connection, you are ready to keep the meeting on. Thank you. Obrigada, Hiller.
Okay. So for a very long time, I was wondering what some of the following phenomena have in common. The trend for ethical fashion, some boycotts that are intended to target nations. For example, I'm thinking about the sort of like the pro-China rather targeting of Hong Kong activists during the anti-extradition law amendment bill in Hong Kong a few years back. I was wondering what some sort of like not very organized consumer campaigns on social media mean, like the burning of New Balance shoes during Donald Trump's inauguration in 2017. But also some Instagrammers that have lately said, you know, we need to stop buying in this phenomenon of de-influencing, as they call it. I was interested in celebrity advocacy, and I was really interested in movements that are targeting advertising texts and spaces specifically. Quite disparate sounding initiatives, let's say, and I wondered what they have in common.
Então, ela estava examinando nessa pesquisa o ativismo no mundo da moda, movimentos de resistência que apareceram em diferentes lugares e também nos ambientes digitais, promovendo o que alguns ativistas chamaram de contra-resistência, né? E contra-influência, né? para propor resistência a alguns argumentos da cultura promocional. Okay, carry on.
So the talk today is broken up in 6 parts. The first part asks what consumer activism is and why you should care. The second gives you a kind of overview of the book and the main arguments. The third focuses on gender specifically. The fourth focuses on anti-consumerism. And the fifth talks about the climate crisis. And then the sixth is the part where I conclude the talk.
Okay. A fala está dividida em 6 partes, que são os capítulos do livro. Não tenho a menor possibilidade de repetir cada um deles aqui, mas vamos lá. Okay.
So, what is consumer activism and why should you care? I define consumer activism as highly or loosely organized, collective or individual actions that employ the marketplace as an arena for contestation and broadens the field of consumption to use the market and the media for political contention. And I just mentioned before some examples.
Então, o primeiro tópico se chama o que é o ativismo do consumo e por que a gente deve se preocupar com isso, né? Glória, se você puder fechar sua câmera, eu vou pedir para todo mundo abrir no final para a gente fazer uma foto, mas obrigada. Deixe o seu nome e o seu e-mail no chat, todo mundo que precisa de certificado, tá bom? Por favor. Então, ela apresentou uma definição do que ela está chamando de ativismo do consumo, né, ou dos consumidores, e agora vamos prosseguir. Can we carry on?
What is really important to say about consumer activism at the beginning is that I treat it as a set of practices. So I call it consumer activism. Some people call it consumption activism, and I agree with that as well, but I wanted to call it consumer activism to have an umbrella term to basically like look at these different kinds of practices. And I call it consumer activism specifically, not because I want to praise or privilege the consumer, but because I want to acknowledge and appraise the centrality of consumers in everyday politics.
Ótimo. Então, ela chama de ativismo dos consumidores para reconhecer a centralidade dos consumidores na política. E ela chama de ativismo, né, dos consumidores, um conjunto de práticas políticas que dizem respeito, que têm o consumo como aspecto central. Ok.
Let's take a specific campaign. So Boohoo is a British e-commerce platform. And it's what you call, a fast fashion platform. A few years back, they launched an international campaign called Do Your Thing, and it featured, these quite well-known influencers who were promoting, self-confidence, individuality, creativity. So, they were sort of like promoting the brand by also promoting themselves. And trying to impress upon consumers this idea that if you're wearing, these kinds of clothes, you're an empowered, usually young woman. And it is important to say.
Então, ela está olhando agora uma campanha específica de uma plataforma de fast fashion britânica que se chama Boohoo, e que em 2018 lançou uma campanha estrelada por influenciadores, geralmente jovens mulheres, que promoviam a marca enquanto promoviam elas próprias, né? Com uma ideia de serem mulheres independentes, autônomas, empoderadas, etc. Ok.
But what they didn't say in the advertisement is, something about the workers, so the people that actually make, the clothes that they sell. There is an organization called Labor Behind the Label, who have been producing reports specifically with workers of Boohoo, for example, and they have demonstrated the violation of labor rights, particularly in Pakistan, for instance.
Aqui ela dá um exemplo de problema que aconteceu com pessoas, trabalhadores da moda no Paquistão. Okay.
But they also have targeted the company for a number of years, and this means that they have actually won certain kinds of demands that they've had. So a couple of years ago, Boohoo, after pressure from the organization, published a list of factories that it uses around the world in a pledge to ensure transparency.
Então, parece que eles ganharam alguns argumentos, algumas das brigas, né, que eles fizeram, algumas das lutas, e ao longo dos anos, a plataforma Boohoo publicou uma lista das fábricas que eles usam para a manufatura das roupas que eles vendem.
So this brings me to, consumer activism. This image that you see here is actually part of a subvertising campaign that Labor Behind the Label did for Black Friday in 2020. where they used, the same kind of like language of advertising, but to say a very different kind of message.
Então aqui é exemplo de uma campanha que foi lançada na Black Friday de 2010, e que usa o mesmo tipo de linguagem visual da publicidade, mas para fazer uma publicidade, para subverter a publicidade e apresentar outro tipo de mensagem bem diferente.
So this is my definition from the book. Also, it's about questioning justice and translating that questioning into action. And as I said, it manifests through different kinds of practices.
E aqui está a definição dela.
So,
manifesta. Okay.
One of the really important things I feel that this particular definition of consumer activism does that hasn't been done before is it brings activism that addresses advertising into the conversation, at the center of the conversation. It looks at advertising and the role of advertising in social and environmental justice. And these are some examples of NGO campaigns and community groups that have been putting advertising at the heart of the conversation.
Ótimo. Então, é importante porque essas campanhas colocam a publicidade no centro do debate social. Existem aqui, ela dá alguns exemplos de campanhas produzidas por ONGs ou grupos sociais de ativistas.
And the United Nations has also recognized about a decade ago that advertising needs to be regulated. Advertising needs to be, critically appraised and carefully practiced.
Então, isso aí é uma resolução da ONU de quase uma década atrás, 2014, que reconheceu que a publicidade precisa ser regulada e precisa seguir conjunto de boas práticas.
And I like the subtitle in the book is Promotional Culture and Resistance, and I like to borrow a definition by Andrew Wernick from the book Promotional Culture and work with it a little bit to explore the impact of advertising in our culture today. So promotional culture for Wernick is the way in which advertising has basically become a condition in all forms of communication.
Ela traz a definição de cultura promocional, que é do sociólogo Andrew Wernick, um sociólogo britânico já falecido. Ele propôs essa tese, né, sobre a cultura promocional ainda nos anos 90. Essa tese tem sido retomada por uma série de autores contemporâneos, ela inclusive, e ela considera importante pensar na cultura promocional nos termos do Andrew Wernick como alguma coisa que diz respeito bastante de perto às práticas prevalentes na cultura contemporânea. Ok?
And I don't need to tell you that you are also already studying this, that we live in an age where, advertising and mass consumerism have created a set of social and environmental problems. And these problems are increasingly augmenting and magnifying. And mass consumerism itself is increasingly increasing.
Ok, ela diz que não precisa falar isso para nós, já que ela sabe que nós estudamos a cultura do consumo, mas nunca é demais lembrar que o consumo de massa e a publicidade tem aumentado, tem tomado proporções gigantescas no contemporâneo. Okay?
Given that we just finished this global festival of consumerism, Black Friday, I just thought I would also mention that and there's a number of critical works from NGOs. For instance, there's a report that came out a couple of years ago called the Dirty Delivery Report that looked at the impact on the environment of UK deliveries for Black Friday specifically, and found it to be the equivalent of about 400 return flights from London to New York.
Wow! E ela está chamando atenção para o grande festival do consumo que nós acabamos de ter com a Black Friday no mundo inteiro. Alguns relatórios têm sido feitos a respeito especificamente das Black Fridays, e uma ONG britânica recentemente divulgou um relatório sobre a Black Friday lá, que só as entregas relacionadas com a Black Friday teriam equivalido a 400 viagens entre Londres e Nova York, em termos de marca de carbono. Okay?
So there's a lot more I can say about that, but I will go back straight into the book itself. So in the description, I gave you a number of questions that the book is trying to address. How have consumer goods captured our imagination? Why are we still so captivated by and find it difficult to escape buying of unnecessary products? I mean, it's a huge conversation. I personally feel very torn by the fact that I feel like there's a promotional email, like one of the brands that I follow is like having a 30% sale, and somehow it's a big opportunity. But anyway, so how have consumer goods captured our imagination? What are the consequences of mass consumerism for our understanding and practice of politics? How does mass consumerism and advertising discourses condition our understanding of crisis, financial, environmental, social crisis? What pathways to action for a better world do they offer? Do advertising campaigns, for instance, offer? And what alternatives are there to these visions of the future?
Bom, então, ela agora, especificamente, nessa segunda parte, está falando do livro que ela lançou, que, aliás, eu aproveito para dizer que ele está disponível na forma de e-book na Amazon, é um livro bem legal. O que falando dos objetivos, né, do livro, quais são os propósitos desse livro também, e basicamente é examinar o grande impacto social e ambiental do consumo nas nossas vidas e que alternativas ou que caminhos alternativos algumas das próprias campanhas promocionais têm oferecido ou têm apresentado para nós. Okay?
So the book specifically focuses on three different political areas. It looks at nationalism and race and ethnicity within that. It looks at gender and particularly feminism and queerness within that. And it looks at the environment, ideas of like economic growth and sustainable consumption. And it looks at issues, technologies, and agents who is mobilized within these discourses.
Ok, eu vou precisar dar uma saída rapidinho para atender o interfone que não para de tocar. Peço desculpas, já volto. I'm going to have to stop listening to you for just a while, but please carry on. I have to take the interphone. Okay.
So these are the aims of the book. The book aims to place the phenomenon in a historical context. It aims to identify its political potential through the use of different agents and media technologies, to interrogate its relationship with promotional industries, especially advertising, to explore its role within activist toolkits, so how social movements have mobilized different consumer activist practices, and to question the extent of its influence. And in doing that, in trying to like frame the aims like that, I aim to contribute to what is discussed as critical advertising studies or critical consumption studies, as well as media activism and promotional culture scholarship.
Bom, essa daí é a capa do livro dela, e ela diz que ela se serve dos estudos de consumo, estudos críticos da publicidade, e é para atingir esses objetivos que estão enumerados nesse slide. Okay.
So what does the book do? First of all, it connects interdisciplinary scholarship on the topic. critical consumption specifically, because much has been written from different sociology, development studies, political science, cultural studies, critical marketing studies. But I try to bring these together and identify the debates and the arguments, and to just like present them in a comprehensive way. That's the first step.
Primeira coisa que o livro faz é apresentar toda a literatura crítica sobre consumo e marketing de uma forma estruturada e crítica também. Okay?
And one of the aims behind doing this comprehensive literature review is to actually showcase areas in the world where the discussion is taking place and question why a similar discussion is not taking place elsewhere. So I see a bias of studies towards the global north in quotation marks, but I basically say that we need more research, because this is actually happening. People are resisting mass consumerism and advertising around the world.
Ótimo. Então, nessa apresentação crítica que ela faz à literatura, ela também se preocupa em demonstrar que, embora haja uma ênfase muito grande na literatura sobre os movimentos que têm acontecido no norte global, ela sempre gosta de enfatizar que movimentos de resistência aos excessos, né, da cultura promocional têm acontecido ao redor do mundo, também no sul global. Okay.
I also aim to provide a comprehensive approach to consumer activism, as I said, by opening up practices, because before it was thought of as either boycotting or ethical consumption, what they call boycotting, but I suggest that it's about a lot more than that, and try to talk about consumer activism as a set of practices, as I said in the beginning.
Então ela vai, durante o livro, ela coloca ênfase no ativismo dos consumidores, examinando diferentes práticas que compreendem muito mais do que aquilo que se chama boycotting, né? Práticas de boicote, etc. É bem mais do que isso.
I also highlight the ambivalence of ideology in consumer activism practices, because when people write about consumer activism, they almost always tend to focus on progressive social change. So, they don't look at, for instance, regressive like campaigns that begin from a place of hate rather than solidarity, for instance. So, a lot of sexist or racist like campaigns that employ consumer power also exist, as well as some really ambiguous ones like, let's shop to like save, the national economy.
É interessante essa parte. Ela coloca ênfase na ambivalência da ideologia do ativismo do consumidor, dessas práticas, porque geralmente elas são fechadas do ponto de vista progressista, ou seja, práticas que propõem caminhos libertários e progressistas, enquanto nesse exame minucioso que ela faz, ela identifica algumas práticas, né, de ativismo do consumidor que abordam viés racista, sexista, ou mesmo englobam discursos de ódio, ou então proposições muito conservadoras, do tipo, vamos comprar para salvar a economia nacional. Okay.
I also wanted to connect consumer activism to media technologies, because it seemed to me that there is some literature on digital consumer activism, let's say, but it usually tends to reproduce the kinds of biases of early scholarship on media activism, like if you have this technology, if you have this app, somehow this will transform the experience of change, of social change. So I wanted to promote a media practice approach in relation to media technologies, but I also wanted to problematize a little bit technologies from an environmental standpoint.
Então, ótimo. Ela também dá uma olhada nas tecnologias de mídia que são utilizadas nesse ativismo do consumidor, justamente para poder colocar uma visão crítica em relação a essas tecnologias que geralmente são apresentadas como panaceia para solucionar problemas, como se as tecnologias elas próprias, os aplicativos e outros, pudessem oferecer soluções, né? Portanto, não é tão comum esse olhar crítico que ela procura lançar em relação a essas tecnologias. Okay?
And finally, I wanted to, as I said in the beginning, bring attention to the fact that there is an imbalance of studies between the global north and south, and we're seeing some scholarship which is beginning to explore that. I have a colleague, Zijian Hu, in Exeter, who has specifically focused on consumer activism in China, and he's looking for the possibilities for citizen activism within a quite curtailed kind of social context. So this book is also an attempt to address asymmetries by actually finding and highlighting work that has been done in different places, and invites work in the field to basically produce an understanding of the phenomenon that is more comprehensive.
Ótimo. Então, como ela já tinha falado antes, o livro também focaliza a atenção no desequilíbrio entre os estudos do ativismo dos consumidores no norte e no sul globais. Ela tem procurado, então, trazer estudos feitos por, enfim, estudiosos sobre fenômenos que têm acontecido, desse tipo, né, que têm acontecido em outras partes do mundo, e também convida os leitores a ficarem atentos a esse tipo de estudo que, de fato, acontece no mundo inteiro, tem acontecido no mundo inteiro.
Okay. So yes, it's an innovative approach, like I said, because it connects to contemporary struggles in relation to these areas, these political areas. It offers a contextual approach to agents. It specifically differentiates between individual citizens and, let's say, celebrities or brands or collectives who are involved in consumer activism. It highlights the ideological goals of activism. It relates consumer activism to advertising resistance, but it also offers, and this is the main, I think, one of the main contributions, a theoretical and methodological mapping of the knowledge that has been produced, and as well as original transnational case studies to illustrate how it can be operationalized.
Ótimo. Que ela destrincha, né, em 5 etapas a abordagem que ela traz no livro.
I'm going to skip this part, which basically tells you what each chapter deals with in terms of questions, but you can see that maybe later if you want this presentation, and I will go to the main argument.
Ok, agora ela vai pular a parte que descreve as perguntas, né, que cada capítulo do livro dela pretende responder, e vai direto para o argumento principal.
So the main argument is that we should not be very quick to celebrate the fact that we can buy things that have a political goal attached to them. So it's against what I call consumer solutionism.
Ótimo. O principal argumento é que a gente não deve ficar tão feliz de poder comprar produtos ou serviços que tenham uma mensagem ideológica anexada a eles. Portanto, o livro se posiciona contra aquilo que ela chama de solucionismo do consumo.
However, we cannot dismiss that consumer activism can actually be a force for advancing socially progressive goals, as I illustrated in the labor behind label example before.
Também não dá para evitar de reconhecer que o ativismo do consumidor promove ou ajuda a promover causas como ela como ela já trouxe em alguns casos que ela examinou aqui.
What I suggest and what I hope I offer in the book is a series of conceptual, theoretical, and methodological tools in order to expand an analysis of resistance within promotional culture.
Então, o que ela tenta fazer com o livro é oferecer uma série de instrumentos para que a gente possa aumentar e elaborar nossas próprias análises sobre os movimentos relacionados ao consumo.
So some of the key arguments, again, quite broad, is basically my identification of things that matter and the extent to which they matter. So I put forward the claim that consumer activism does matter, but it matters to a certain extent, which, as I said, we can only understand through specific theoretical and methodological interventions.
Muito bem, aqui são os principais argumentos, ou aquilo que realmente importa, e o primeiro deles é que o ativismo do consumidor realmente importa, embora seja importante considerar diferentes elementos relacionados a ele.
Context really matters because, as I said, there is this tendency to talk about like the UK and the US, for example, but we see, for instance, that if you look at the political science scholarship that looks at this phenomenon of political consumerism, which is basically consumer activism, they say that because they rely on statistical methods, on surveys, for instance, they say, oh, look, if you look at Greece, you don't have political consumerism, you have very low political consumerism. But in fact, it's about how you approach the topic. So if you widen your understanding of what you mean by consumer activism, and you think about collective efforts and initiatives like solidarity purchase groups, more sort of collective approaches to consumption, then you see that actually you also have, this phenomenon there. So you really need to think about context and to ask the questions carefully.
Muito bem, ela dá exemplos sobre por que o contexto importa, né? Não só trazendo novamente aquele argumento de que é importante evitar, né, falar do ativismo do consumidor apenas do ponto de vista do Reino Unido, dos Estados Unidos, mas também oferecendo uma crítica, por exemplo, aos estudos de ciência política, estudiosos de ciência política, que tendem a examinar as coisas do ponto de vista das estatísticas e concluem apressadamente que, por exemplo, não há ativismo do consumidor na Grécia. E ela diz que a questão é que a pergunta está mal formulada, ou estaria mal formulada, se você olhar para outro tipo de práticas, olhar com outras lentes, você vai ver que há, por exemplo, movimentos bastante interessantes de compras coletivas, compras solidárias, consumo solidário, e que podem ser entendidos dentro dessa chave do ativismo do consumidor. Okay?
And the other three areas that I've also highlighted already is that, ideology matters. It's really important to question the ideological basis of consumer activism. Agency matters, as we just saw, and methodology matters in terms of producing knowledge in this particular area. So this is, the kind of overarching framework of the book.
Então, o livro também entende que a ideologia, tanto ideologia, agência e metodologia, também são fatores importantes nesse tipo de estudo. Okay?
I can spend a little bit of time here talking about the different kinds of agencies that I identify, but very briefly before I go into my next example.
Tá, então
So
agências, né? Okay.
So first, obviously, there are the citizens who are continuously referred to as consumers, and this is the example from an app by the United Nations, actually called One World, and they are, encouraging us to realize our power by becoming mindful consumers.
Muito bem, ela está colocando foco aqui no fato de que mais e mais frequentemente os cidadãos têm sido chamados de consumidores. e aqui ela traz um argumento das Nações Unidas, de uma campanha das Nações Unidas chamada One World, que pede que, enfim, preconiza que nós temos poder enquanto consumidores, desde que a gente faça o que eles entendem como consumo, pratique, né, o consumo ou as compras de forma consciente. Ok?
Then we have market actors. So we have brands, some brands that present themselves as, activists, like this oat milk brands from Sweden called Oatly that also do these like advertisements that look like street art, or a fast fashion brand like Primark, which has a few years ago did a campaign to promote Pride, and said that they were proud to be supporting the UK's biggest LGBTQ charity, Stonewall, but actually gave like 20% of the earnings from that particular advertising campaign to the NGO and kept 80% themselves, which is called pink washing, if you like.
Ótimo. Então, ela traz aqui alguns atores do mercado, como a marca sueca Oatly, que faz a propaganda dela, estrutura a propaganda dela de uma forma parecida com arte de rua, e a marca de fast fashion Primark, que se apresenta como amiga da causa do orgulho gay, promoveu uma enorme campanha de apoio a Stonewall, mas deu, no final das contas, só 20% do lucro para Stonewall, ficou com 80% para ela própria. Então, isso é um ótimo exemplo daquilo que se chama pink washing.
Then we have celebrities who have been engaged in processes of social change for a very long time. I'm giving one example here of British actress Emma Watson, who was appointed UN Goodwill Ambassador for Gender in 2014. And she has done a number of campaigns to promote gender equality, but also sustainable consumption. And she's founded her own site that is dedicated to sustainable fashion. And she was very recently appointed on the board of a luxury fashion conglomerate that runs brands like Gucci and Balenciaga, etc.
Bom, então aqui são as celebridades, né? E ela está focalizando na Emma Watson, que não só se tornou embaixadora das Nações Unidas, como também tem promovido o consumo sustentável até no próprio site dela. E, enfim, é um exemplo de celebridade que trabalha com essa causa.
And finally, we have subvertisers, so activists, whether it's individual activists or activists working in unison with groups who are specifically directly targeting advertising, and they have been protesting mass consumerism since at least the 1990s. They have recently, in 2017, coalesced into a transnational social movement called Subvertisers International, and they have been doing quite interesting work that I will talk about a little bit later.
Muito bem. Outro tipo de agência, né, do ativismo do consumidor, são os chamados subvertisers, aqueles que subvertem a propaganda, tanto individualmente quanto reunidos em coletivos, e recentemente criou-se um coletivo internacional para esse fim. Ela vai falar mais sobre esse movimento mais à frente. Okay?
So as I said, the book puts forward a practice approach, and it suggests that when we're looking at consumer activism, we need to look at ecologies of communication, publicities. So here I'm thinking of Habermasian publicities, critical but also manipulative publicities, and the dialectics between the two. And we need to identify where the responsibility lies. Does it lie in the individual consumer? Does it lie in a partnership between the brand and the consumer? or does it lie in collective efforts of non-commercial actors?
Muito bem. Então, o que ela propõe é uma abordagem prática que reúne as ecologias, as publicidades aqui não, é a arena pública, né? Os tipos de discurso em vigor na arena pública, porque ela fala do habemas aqui, e também as responsabilidades, focaliza as responsabilidades.
So now I want to talk specifically about gender, and I want to talk about the relationship between commercialism and gender justice. So there's a chapter in the book that looks precisely at that, and it considers the possibilities of brand-focused activism focused on justice for women and LGBTQ people, as well as limitations of this form of femvertising.
Muito bem. Então, nesse momento, ela vai olhar para gênero. Há um capítulo específico do livro dela sobre isso. Ela vai olhar para diferentes campanhas que se baseiam em discursos de gênero, não só em relação às mulheres, mas também ao público LGBTQ, e uma crítica ao que tem sido chamado de femvertising, né? A publicidade voltada para o público feminino. Okay?
So the feminist revolution will not be marketized, and I ask what is at stake when feminism is mediated through promotional culture and consumer culture. And as every chapter does, I first identify the key concepts. So what do we mean when we talk about gender? What do we mean when we talk about feminism? Then I outline the theoretical approaches that have been applied. I look at what methodologies they did, and then I have a case study where I apply this to.
Muito bem, então ela começa oferecendo uma definição do que é gênero, do que é o feminismo, para, de fato, examinar criticamente as possibilidades que existem para contestar a hegemonia de gênero e as injustiças baseadas na sexualidade e no gênero.
So when you look at the scholarship on feminism specifically and consumer politics, but also gender more broadly and consumer politics, you have political consumerism approaches, so political science, looking at why is it that there's more women participating, for instance, in this consumer activism. What does it mean? The extent to which biological sex actually influences political participation. We have approaches that are called feminist consumerism, which come from cultural studies and are trying to move away from this, political economy / Marxist critique of manipulation, but they see limited opportunities to do that. We have approaches to so-called commodity feminism, which are what I think are the early approaches to this phenomenon of femvertising, where advertising is trying to speak to social struggles in order to gain more value. And we have more recently feminist commodity activism approaches.
Então, diferentes tipos de abordagem, eu não vou entrar no específico de cada uma, mas é muito interessante como ela vai decupando até numa linha do tempo, né, historicamente, mas não só, em termos também do embasamento acadêmico de cada um desses movimentos dentro da questão do gênero nas políticas do consumo.
This is a very interesting, area for research. Obviously, a lot of gaps, a lot of really interesting crossovers. What I want to focus a little bit on before I move to the example is that, particularly in commodity feminism, for instance, scholars have written a lot about, how problematic it is when queerness is mediated in the marketplace, because advertising works in a specific way. They want an archetype of a consumer to speak to. So that is a little bit incongruent with, queerness, but also, when they imagine, for instance, homosexual consumers, they're typically imagined as male and typically white. Also, so again, it's a reified approach that excludes people despite its attempt to be inclusive.
Ótimo. Então, ela está aqui falando mais um pouquinho sobre o feminismo de mercadoria, né? Que, na sua crítica a determinadas abordagens, como, por exemplo, o tipo de publicidade que tenta abarcar o público queer. Fica estranho porque a publicidade trabalha com um endereçamento a um tipo de consumidor arquetípico, e não dá para você colocar o queer nesse arquétipo, é quase que uma contradição de termos. E o mesmo acontece, ou semelhante, pois acontece quando a publicidade tenta focalizar o público gay. Geralmente é visto como masculino e branco. Então, na tentativa de incluir, ela acaba promovendo uma série de exclusões também. Okay.
So I suggest that when we're undertaking this kind of investigation, we need to think about gendering consumer activism and queering it also. We need to think about gender that is, beyond the single indicator that influences consumer behavior. We need to think about the crossover between gender and race, racializing consumer activism while we're gendering it. We need to think about feminism as a collective project rather than an individual project that, as I mentioned in my first example, influencers there promote this certain idea of empowerment that privileges certain kinds of women that buy these clothes, but excludes and exploits the women that make the clothes. We need to remember and recognize the history of feminism or the hair stories, and we need to think about it beyond the West and in relation to post-colonialism as well, because there's a lot of really interesting research on feminism and for example, the sexualization, let's say, of beautiful African women when it comes to ethical chocolate, brands and campaigns. And finally, we need to critically conceptualize a feminist politics. We need to be intersectional in how we imagine it. And I am definitely not reinventing the wheel here when it comes to thinking about gender, but I try to do this work in relation to the scholarship on consumer activism, which is a little bit blind to or quite static when it comes to gender. And this is what I put forward for future investigations.
Bem, ela tenta então juntar os estudos críticos sobre o ativismo do consumidor com os estudos de gênero, procurando trazer para a luz determinados pontos cegos nesses estudos e portanto, trazendo nuances, né, uma abordagem mais nuançada para esses estudos de gênero relacionados com o estudo crítico do ativismo de consumidores que ela traz. Bem legal. Okay.
So here is my example in this chapter. A chocolate brand, a Greek chocolate, very iconic. And I ask, what does chocolate have to do with what I just talked about? It's called Lacta, and it was owned by a Greek company until the 90s when it was sold to the US multinational Kraft Foods that was later renamed Mondelez International. And it's it's always used a particular advertising company, Ogilvy Greek, the Greek branch of Ogilvy, to build this brand on the concept of love. Behind all of its advertisement is this idea of love. And in the 90s and 2000s, it was a very simple message. The focus was always on a man who was, there to do his own thing, and somehow, somehow they always like clashed with his loved one. But then when he saw a chocolate, he forgave her or was reunited with her. And yeah, it was an interesting and problematic set of representations that I can show you an example of, until a couple of years ago in this particular advertising campaign.
Muito bem, então a Lacta, eu não sabia disso, era uma marca grega que foi comprada pela Kraft Foods em 2012, não, desculpa, em 1991 e depois renomeada em 2012. A campanha publicitária dessa marca sempre foi construída em torno do conceito de amor, e até durante os anos 90 e 2000, com uma storyline, né, um storytelling muito simples, bem um tanto problemático também, sempre um homem focado nele mesmo, que de repente se depara com chocolate, aí se reconcilia com a sua paixão, enfim, sua namorada, mulher, seja lá o que for.
Here's an example. It's under a minute, and I hope we can see it.
Esse é um exemplo do que mudou.
This is it from 2010. It's called I Am Sorry, and it's very indicative of the kind of advertising that Lacta did and how it promoted hegemonic masculinities and, amenable and very affectionate femininities.
Então, esse é um exemplo do tipo de propaganda que a Lacta fazia, promovendo a masculinidade hegemônica e um tipo de feminilidade também afetuosa e hegemônica.
Until 2019, when they did a very different campaign called Act for Love, which was also produced by the same advertising agency. It was launched on Valentine's Day, as all of their advertisement, because of the love co-branding. And it was very different. It did not focus on a single white male protagonist. It did not rely on digital innovations. The company was also really interested in doing branded entertainment. So they had like a lot of, they had the first branded entertainment campaign, for example. And it was really geared to speak to the rise of the Me Too movement, which was happening at the same time.
Então, esse é um exemplo dessa campanha Act for Love, lançada em 2019, uma campanha que tentava também se estabelecer como branded entertainment. A Lacta foi das primeiras marcas a trabalhar com isso. E, portanto, nessa campanha ela deixa de falar sobre o homem branco hegemônico, heterossexual hegemônico, e começa a apresentar um pouco de diversidade para se alinhar com o movimento Me Too, né, que estava acontecendo na época. Okay?
So here they're not trying to sell love only, but they're trying to sell socially diverse, multicultural, queer, disabled, abled couples in love. And the campaign was run by a freelance photographer who had done work with refugees as well as women involved in anti-trafficking, in trafficking. And it produced videos of 28 real couples, photography exhibition in a shopping mall in the center of Athens, and a lot of video content for each couple in the YouTube videos of Lacta. And it was very different, but it was also, it caused a lot of excitement and a lot of controversy in the Greek public discourse.
Então, foi uma campanha que se desdobrou em várias ações e que se tornou muito popular na Grécia na época. There is a question from the audience asking if you're going to make available this presentation later on.
I can, yes, I can.
Ok, então ela disse
I
que
can
pode.
send it to you, Gisela.
Ela pode me mandar depois e isso vai ser ótimo. A gente pode replicar isso depois dentro do programa de outras maneiras. Thank you. Okay.
Pleasure. So I remember in the beginning I talked about promotional culture and Andrew Wernick, and one of his key arguments in relation to promotional culture is that it tends to typify resistance, sort of like neutralize it, and bring it back into the mainstream. And this is interesting. There's a lot of discourse and debate on this phenomenon of woke washing, producing like advertising that is aware of racial injustice, for example, and what it means. And I kind of reflect a little bit on these dynamics and talk about this phenomenon as romancing diversity or romance diversity that Lacta did.
Ótimo, good. Então, há toda uma discussão, né, crítica sobre o quanto se estaria aparando as arestas, né, trabalhando com a diversidade de um jeito empobrecedor. Não vou saber aqui agora reproduzir exatamente o vocabulário que ela usa, mas, enfim, ela lançando mão desse tipo de estudos, ela olha para essa campanha e ela entende como uma forma de romancear a diversidade. Okay?
So it was quite brave as a campaign in terms of challenging societal norms. It caused a lot of backlash as well, and it did an interesting experiment that they posted on a YouTube video where they hired actors and they went and stood in front of a bus stop advertising panel and talked about the ad and tried to see the responses. It's kind of classic, but it became a trending topic on social media, and it generated like a lot of income for Lacta. Their sales went up by 13.5%, and they won a number of awards for this particular campaign. So there's a question here as to whether this kind of work, this kind of advertising campaign serves the brand more than it serves the cause.
A questão é se esse tipo de campanha que foi super premiada, gerou lucros para a marca, e, como eu disse antes, se desdobrou em diferentes ações muito interessantes. A questão é se ela serve à causa ou se ela serve à marca, né? É o que sempre fica. Interesting, because here in Brazil, this campaign focused or featured different couples in love, and one of them that generated a lot of confusion was an older couple kissing. So white-haired man and woman giving a big kiss while they wait for the subway. That wasn't very well received here.
Interesting.
Yeah.
There's so much to say about this and to analyze like the sort of promotional life of these kinds of campaigns. But I just wanted to add that with this one, it was a campaign that featured 28 couples in love, interracial, some like same-sex, some not like something like radically different that you would like consider socially like diverse, but when it came, so this was all online, and it was like I said, on YouTube and the social media. But in the outdoors campaign, when it came to the bus stops, for example, you didn't have homosexual couples actually, apart from the exception of the social experiment that they posted on Facebook. So it was very carefully like contained. So in terms of gender justice, there's there are limitations to like how much a brand like this can promote and progress public discourse, public debate.
Makes sense. Okay.
So I also want to talk a little bit about anti-consumerism, which is a huge topic, but I will talk specifically about subvertising, about activists that target advertising specifically, because it was Black Friday recently, and it is quite important to showcase that. But also because, as I said in the beginning, I think that we cannot talk about consumer activism without talking about anti-advertising activism or subvertising activism. So subvertising, and this is from a book of a subvertiser and a street artist that produces this kind of artistic interventions, is basically a response to advertising. Sometimes they remove advertising, sometimes they replace like original artworks in bus stop advertising panels. Sometimes they deface, vandalize advertising, but it's a number of different kinds of interventions on advertising in order to correct or distort or replace the meaning. And we had, as of the last couple of weeks, a campaign that I'll talk about in a minute, but the important thing to say about subvertising for me is that so far in the scholarship, it has tended to produce an understanding that there are these activists who are trying to make us, the consumers that are so passive to this system, awaken. And so there's this critique that, these activists like culture jamming, for example, activists are trying to awaken us. So there's a kind of a problematic relationship there between like activists and publics. So the criticism has been that, yes, there are these activists doing this, but they think that we're all, passive and like not able to like take responsibility of our own lives. And I am against this because I think it's a lot more collaborative. It's become a lot more collaborative these days.
Ok, então ela está aqui dizendo que, detalhando mais especificamente movimentos de anticonsumo e de subversão de publicidade. Ela diz que é um movimento, é uma causa muito mais nuançada do que se pode pensar num primeiro momento, e é importante olhar com cuidado. Okay?
So anti-advertising includes a number of different kinds of interventions, as I said, from ad takeovers, but also includes advocacy work. There are a lot of groups in France, for example, or in the UK that lobby for regulation. So they speak with local governments and they're trying to limit the number of advertising spaces in public space. There's also groups that are more interested in engaging the public critically. So they're doing workshops and exhibitions. A group in Argentina called Proyecto Squatters, a group in Spain called Consume Hasta Morir. Around the world, there are collective approaches to addressing advertising through very different kinds of means.
And
recently,
tem diferentes tipos de subvertising, de movimentos, né, de subversão da publicidade. Alguns são movimentos que efetivamente pegam uma publicidade e subvertem ela. Grupos, né, que fazem isso, coletivos, geralmente. Brandalism no Reino Unido e outros. Outros grupos fazem lobby para regulamentação da publicidade nos espaços públicos, e outros ainda se dedicam a promover workshops e exposições, como alguns projetos que ela cita na Espanha, na Argentina. Tem no mundo inteiro, segundo ela. Okay?
And as I said, very recently, 6 years ago, groups from 7 or 8 different countries came together to form a transnational social movement called Subvertisers International. And for the last couple of years, they have been doing a 2-week set of activities around the world called the ZAP Games, where they invite individuals, but also collective citizens and groups to do different kinds of things against advertising and document them by sending it. So you can find them on social media if you look this campaign up.
Ah, legal. Então, ela está falando que 7 anos atrás, alguns desses grupos se juntaram, formaram esse coletivo internacional chamado Subvertisers International, e eles promovem uma ação concatenada internacional, com duração de 2 semanas, que se chama os Zap Games, e promovem uma série de ações que podem ser vistas no site.
So I've done a lot of research in the last few years. I've interviewed subvertisers in different cities, in different countries, in order to understand how they imagine, what it is that they want, what kind of issues they identify with advertising, what kind of a vision of the future they have, what motivates them. And I found that they're motivated by a variety of different issues, ranging, from state violence and media propaganda to economic growth, social justice. And it's a very complex and very important, I think, set of demands that they're putting forward.
Muito bem, o que motiva esses coletivos é uma série de agendas importantes, agendas e demandas importantes, algumas delas estão listadas aqui, então é bem variado, bem matizado politicamente. Okay.
So here are some examples. There's one individual. It's just one person who has a regular job and lives in Brighton, the city where I live in as well. And he just makes these stickers that criticize the media, criticize, for instance, the BBC for not reporting on the privatization of the National Health Service. And for him, he wanted to do it to communicate to people in a funny way and kind of take away the heaviness and the anger of what people imagine that activism is. So it was little acts on the day-to-day route that he did.
Legal, aqui ela traz um exemplo de um ativista que trabalha na cidade onde ela mora, e ele faz esses stickers, né, esses adesivos com mensagens, trazendo mensagens políticas importantes como essa, sobre a BBC, protestando contra o fato da BBC não ter noticiado o desmantelamento, não dar bola, né, não noticiar o desmantelamento do Sistema Nacional de Saúde do Reino Unido, o NHS. E ele faz isso de uma forma simples, mas ao mesmo tempo atraente. Ele quer tirar ou retirar a raiva, o ódio e o gume, né, do movimento ativista, que pode alienar determinadas pessoas não afeitas a esse tipo de discurso mais raivoso. Okay?
But then there's also groups that come from environmental activism that then, so Consume Hasta Morir came from the Spanish Confederation of Environmental NGOs, Ecologistas en Acción. So they came out of that in order to specifically address advertising. And they have been doing a lot of really interesting work with community organizing, but their main focus is to keep reminding people that behind advertising there are all these connections that we need to make, connections with each other, connections with our historical context, connections with the environment.
Muito bem, aqui é um exemplo da ação desse grupo espanhol que promove uma série de ações diferentes, mas sempre tem como pano de fundo essa mensagem de que por trás da publicidade tem conexões que a gente precisa fazer de diferentes tipos, com as consequências ambientais, com a parte coletiva das nossas ações, lembrar que é sempre uma ação, né, tem consequências coletivas e etc. É bem interessante isso.
And then also more recently, these are all quite recent campaigns. This is from 2017. This is a grassroots network called Ad-Free Cities that started in Bristol, but soon developed around the UK. So it's a grassroots network of groups that are targeting advertising, but they're doing lots of different kinds of work. So they're they're interested in communicating what's wrong with advertising. They're working with councils, as I said, on the local level to lobby and regulate advertising. They're giving guidance on how to organize in your own city. They have a blog series with academics that I wrote something about as well. They have a podcast, they do research, they produce original reports, really high quality and really, thorough and professional kind of work.
É um grupo bastante bem organizado, esse é também do Reino Unido, que trabalha em diferentes frentes, fazendo um trabalho profundamente profissional, de alta qualidade e bem variado. Basicamente, é de identificar quais são os problemas com a publicidade e trabalhar tanto em nível local, dos conselhos municipais, quanto oferecendo orientação sobre como se organizar, como os cidadãos podem se organizar em grupos, em coletivos, fazem blogs com acadêmicos, ela própria já participou desse blog, um podcast, produzem pesquisa e emitem relatórios bastante detalhados e muito profissionais, muito bem feitos. Okay?
So anti-consumerism is a complex area. And in the book, I focus specifically on one case study to counterbalance the femvertising campaign that I talked about before, because this is a subvertising campaign in New York that specifically focused on gender. And it was during the time of Trump in the US, where there were a lot of groups that were, became vocal and active very quickly. So this is a campaign against gender violence, against gender injustice. And their method was to basically find New York phone booths that were, usually empty. Apparently, advertisers did not really use them as much. They were more interested in the bigger billboards, and put different kinds of messages there promoting gender justice and gender equality.
Então, um movimento interessante nos Estados Unidos que cresceu durante o desgoverno do Trump, um movimento a favor da igualdade ou justiça, né, de gênero. Eles utilizaram cabines telefônicas na cidade de Nova York, que geralmente estão vazias e que não são utilizadas, não costumam ser utilizadas pela publicidade, que preferem áreas maiores, né, superfícies maiores para colocar suas mensagens. Então, eles fizeram toda uma série ocuparam essas cabines telefônicas com toda uma série de mensagens a favor da justiça de gênero, contra a violência de gênero e etc. Fizeram um trabalho bem coordenado e bem importante. Okay.
So here are some of the works that they put forward.
E alguns dos seus trabalhos, olha que legal.
They were engaging with a consumer politics. They were criticizing, they were actually calling for a boycott for Ivanka Trump's brand, which was ditched by a lot of the commercial spaces in the US. There was a huge movement to boycott Trump-related businesses anyway. There were big campaigns like Grab Your Wallet, which was started by one single person as well. So there was a movement to boycott Trump in general. So they reproduced that.
Havia já movimento anti-Trump e esse coletivo tomou parte disso e promoveu também ações anti-Trump, anti-Ivanka Trump, e de boicote a qualquer coisa relacionada aos negócios da família Trump.
So there was another one where they basically, this was a photographer who took photographs and his photographs were pasted on the photo booths. This was a photograph from a rally against the Muslim ban, so-called Muslim ban that Trump instated. There were, lots of images of lots of like messages of queerness, lots of like presence of queer messages. Resistance is trans. So it's a very different kind of campaign to the one that I talked about before. Same issue, very different approach and execution.
Não, o mesmo tema daquela campanha da Lacta, mas com outro tipo de abordagem bem diferente, por outro coletivo. Legal de ver também. Good.
So in the next part, before I come to the conclusion, I want to talk about what they call the elephant in the room type of thing. The question of the environment. So this is all fine, and these are debates that have been, kind of carried away in different ways, although in disparate ways. But what about the climate crisis? We have been using, Zoom to communicate. We're dependent on digital technologies to do everything in our life, and we tend to celebrate the fact that we have social media platforms so we can know about these kinds of campaigns. But what about their own impact? So in the book, I focus on the smartphone specifically in the book when it comes to the environment. And even subvertising campaigns have constantly put forward an environmental message.
Então, agora, olhando para o meio ambiente, ela vai focalizar especificamente nos telefones celulares.
I like this one specifically from COP21, where they talk about the fact that these technologies are designed to become obsolete within a couple of years. The smartphone is one of the most common and one of the most controversial technologies that we own. There's a number of studies, academic studies, as well as NGO reports that talk about, the manufacturing of smartphone and, the kind of labor and environmental violence at that site. Here is just a few. There's also Jack Q's Goodbye, I Slave, which I would recommend. So the question is, we know this, we kind of know this already. Where is the space for action within consumer activism? What are the options we have? Because these technologies become obsolete the minute we touch them, as I say, and smartphone sales are only expected to grow and very fast.
Bom, nós sabemos desse problema, nós sabemos que os celulares são feitos para se tornarem obsoletos muito rapidamente. Nós sabemos que a venda desses produtos só tende a aumentar, nós sabemos de tudo isso, das consequências graves, de todo tipo de violência, não só em termos de meio ambiente, mas também em termos de relações de trabalho. Há todo um corpo de literatura acadêmica sobre isso, ela indicou aqui alguns trabalhos que ela considera importantes e... Okay.
So, there are only two options really when it comes to thinking about resistance, consumer activism, and the environment. The first one is that we... Sorry?
No, I'm just trying to translate. Okay, so, all right.
So the first one is that we just keep our phone for as long as we can, and we really repair it when it breaks down. So we stop buying it when we think it's almost broken.
Então, a primeira opção é a gente manter os nossos celulares até o máximo possível, consertar, parar de entrar nessa roda de substituir a cada novo modelo que é lançado. Okay, so this is one option.
This is one option. And the second one is buying an ethical smartphone. And here you have a lot of really, points of controversy. Because first of all, they're, more expensive. So there's, they're not for everyone's budget. But also even the ones that exist, and there's three, as far as I'm concerned, I know three, one from the US, one from Germany, and one from the Netherlands. And the one that is considered the most ethical, like smartphone, the Fairphone, I mean, even the CEO of the company says that, you know, it's as ethical as it gets. It can't be 100% ethical. So, you know, there is.
Ok, então a segunda opção seria comprar um smartphone ético. Que ela saiba, existem 3 no mundo, três marcas, uma americana, uma do Reino Unido e outra dos Países Baixos. Qual seria o mais ético de todos? Parece que é esse Fairphone, mas mesmo o CEO da empresa diz que ele é tão ético quanto consegue ser, ou seja, quais são os limites, né, desse tipo de manufatura. Okay?
So there are serious limits to what, you know, is called green consumerism and ethical consumption of smartphones. And in this particular area, I think that the solution cannot come from consumers unless they're exercising pressure to basically like limit the production of smartphones. So this is an industry problem. This is a policy problem. It's not something that can be resolved individually or even collectively.
Ok, então ela entende que esse não é um problema que pode ser resolvido coletivamente pelos consumidores, é um problema da indústria, é um problema das políticas públicas, é um problema da regulamentação e não uma questão que possa ser resolvida pela ação dos consumidores.
And here is where I also side with a lot of the scholarship on big growth. And this idea that we need to think about and implement real limits to production, for example. And this is what I hope to be doing research on in the future. I am now ready for the concluding remarks of this talk.
Okay, just a minute. There is a remark here by one of the participants, Bianca. She's one of our PhD candidates. She says, in Brazil, the cost of repairing a smartphone often equals the price of purchasing a new one.
That's a really important observation. And it's true that it is designed so that, you know, we are constantly, you know, feeding into that market. There's not a lot of option, and it really has to do with policy. In the European Union, they've been trying to pass, I think they passed last year a law on repairability. So each manufacturer has to have a very clear plan for how the smartphone or the technology is repaired. And there are a lot of so-called repair cafes that are emerging. I don't know if, you know, there's a similar culture emerging in Brazil, or whether you have to go to a specific, like, you know, the iPhone, for example, the iStore, and get it done there. Yeah, but it's very slowly happening, but it's definitely not like, yeah, it's not as widespread a practice as it should be. But this is where...
Another scary thing about Brazil is that we have a huge population of over 200 million people, and we have more smartphones in Brazil than inhabitants. This is very scary.
Yeah. It's an industry problem, and it's a policy problem. I mean, there are so many things we also don't know about our smartphones, like the fact that they have radiation, like they're always sold, and they're supposed to be safe, but, you know, they're never like truly safe. I mean, the more you read about it, the more it's recommended that you do not actually sleep in the same room as your smartphone. That you spend as much time away from it.
Tem muita coisa que a gente não sabe sobre os smartphones, por exemplo, a questão da radiação. Quanto mais a gente lê, mais a gente vê que a gente realmente não deve dormir no mesmo cômodo que o nosso smartphone, porque é perigoso. Enfim, tem muita coisa que a gente não sabe. É um problema da indústria e é um problema também das políticas públicas. Okay?
So to conclude what has been quite a broad-reaching like talk, and I'm sure we can talk about more specific things in the Q&A. The book asks this question of, the potential. And typically, like, there's an argument that you cannot really change much through consumption because you're just engaging with the tools that are already there from a system that encourages you to be a consumer rather than someone who resists. And there are challenges. There are a lot of challenges when it comes to thinking about harnessing consumer power for change. I talked about persisting contradictions, like this romance diversity that favors the brand rather than the cause. There's a across the book identification of moments where, while there are a lot of different agents involved in consumer activism, there's also a kind of asymmetry in the kind of, like, let's say, airtime or the attention that we get. So like a celebrity is far more like broad-reaching than an individual citizen, or even a very well organized like grassroots network. So there is a hierarchy of promotionalism, and there's what I just talked about, the media paradox, that we think these technologies have the potential to liberate us, empower us, but they also really have the potential to just drain the planet of its resources. And obsolescence injustice might sound like trite and kind of boring, but it's a real thing. And we just talked about how there are limits to overcoming that if it costs more to repair your phone. So there are real challenges for sure.
Então, aqui alguns dos desafios para esse tipo de ativismo, né? Enfim, e um deles tem a ver com aquela romanceada diversidade que ela já falou antes. Outro tem a ver com as hierarquias da visibilidade dentro da cultura promocional. Então, uma celebridade sempre vai angariar maior visibilidade do que indivíduos comuns ou mesmo coletivos, né? Alguns coletivos. E, por fim, tem o que ela chama do paradoxo da mídia, que é enquanto nós nos tornamos crescentemente acostumados e mesmo dependente delas, elas contribuem de uma forma bem grave para a crise ambiental e também para isso que ela está chamando da injustiça da obsolescência, né? Assim, a gente não consegue remediar isso sozinhos, né? É realmente uma questão, como ela disse, de políticas públicas e da própria indústria. Okay?
But I suggest that we continue trying to imagine alternatives and asking ourselves what we can do as individuals, as collectives, as neighborhoods, as organizations. And some of the key sort of suggestions that I imagine consumer activism can have for prosperous futures is to first and foremost really take advertising and question advertising and challenge it at the level of representation and challenge it at the level of material presence in our day-to-day lives, and also challenge it in terms of its environmental footprint, because there's a lot of research on how much energy billboard advertisers who lit up at night actually consume.
Então, o primeiro deles, né, primeiro tipo de ativismo que ela está defendendo tem a ver com a própria publicidade, né, as práticas publicitárias. Então, prestar atenção e desafiar essas práticas publicitárias que promovem o consumo em massa. Algumas dessas práticas são bem danosas e a gente tem que estar sempre de olho nelas. Okay?
Next, I don't want to be didactic and to say that we should, but I would say that it would be good to reconsider our consumer habits, especially when buying is becoming increasingly easier and increasingly cheaper online. There's Temu, this new platform that has taken off from China last year, that is everywhere now. And I very quickly, you will know, and you will be able to tell me so much on this. I saw that Brazil is one of the leading places in terms of e-commerce, that is just Amazon is not as big as it is over here, for example, but there are other regional and national e-commerce players that are really massive and capturing like audiences. And I'm suggesting there are alternatives to these.
Muito bem, a próxima coisa que a gente pode fazer é reconsiderar nossos próprios hábitos de consumo numa era de consumo instantâneo e ubíquo. Quer dizer, mais e mais a gente é convidado a consumir, né, de diferentes maneiras. Então, quais são as grandes plataformas de comércio online que a gente utiliza e que talvez a gente precise começar a repensar e etc. Okay?
And finally, there's the possibility of like actually financially supporting where and whenever it's possible movements and media that are similar to the kinds of like campaigns and causes that we would like to support. So rather than buying something to support a cause, maybe supporting like a movement by like contributing a little bit every day, like maybe every month. So independent media, for example, that call for like a small donation to the extent that someone can, is I'm saying an alternative to buying something ethically.
Ok, bem, well, very well. E o terceiro e último tem a ver com oferecer apoio e financiamento mesmo, fundos, né, para movimentos e também mídia independente que trabalhe na promoção de futuros mais justos, sustentáveis e inclusivos. Então, particularmente, ela chamou atenção para mídia, né, canais independentes de mídia que geralmente precisam de financiamento, precisam de apoio financeiro para continuar existindo, para continuarem existindo, ok?
So I also see opportunities in consumer activism, citizens thinking and acting critically, and advertisers are being forced to take a stand, whether in representing social or environmental causes or actually in their funding decisions. So what I didn't talk about is a movement that has arisen that is pushing businesses to really, advertisers to really think what kind of businesses they're funding. And there's a lot of divestment from, for example, news organizations that are promoting hate speech from advertisers. So advertisers don't want to be, involved with businesses that are targeted. So they do often divest from businesses. So there are also like material sort of like engagements of advertisers. And increasingly, there are more activists targeting advertising with a variety of different ways and motives, as I discussed.
Bem, algumas das oportunidades estão listadas nesse slide. A ideia é também pensar nos próprios publicitários, como que eles... qual é a posição que eles assumem, tanto nas representações presentes no trabalho deles, quanto também nas decisões que eles tomam em relação ao financiamento das campanhas. Crescentemente, mais e mais grupos ativistas têm tomado como alvo a publicidade. Então, é importante pensar nos cidadãos que pensam e agem criticamente. Então, é um movimento diferente da coisa do consumidor apenas. Ok?
But obviously, this kind of optimism needs to be balanced with situated analysis through critical methodological designs, focus on practices, and the questioning of existing knowledge as produced within hierarchies that privilege global North agents and narratives.
Muito bem. Também é importante questionar essas hierarquias do mundo acadêmico que privilegia o norte global em detrimento do sul global. Então, trabalhar para promover um tipo de conhecimento mais nuançado e mais inclusivo é uma das coisas e uma das posições importantes para serem tomadas. E também outros tipos de considerações de ordem ética e política em relação à promoção de conhecimento e à promoção de práticas ativistas relacionadas a esse tema. Isso. Então,
So to conclude, I mean, this is what the book did. It questioned the constitution of activism through consumption, to locate the phenomenon within contemporary contexts, to conceptualize it within promotional culture, and to provide a set of theoretical and methodological guidelines for future research. And I'm happy to take any questions you have.
Muito bem, para terminar, o livro dela, né, enfim, promove uma promoção, né, enfim, do ativismo do consumidor, por meio da cultura do consumo e da cultura promocional, faz uma defesa desse tipo de movimento, né, de ativismo, e agora ela está pronta para as perguntas. Ok? Thank you very much. Ah, that's nice. Quite a nice touch.
My
Okay.
limited Brazilian Portuguese.
So I would like now to invite you all to open up your cameras so we can see you. Okay, we have people in different parts, even people that are not in Brazil. Hello, 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 everybody. Some had to leave. They said goodbye here. Ok, so would anybody, alguém gostaria de fazer uma pergunta para tá, Rosa? Okay, Rosa has a comment. She's in Portugal now doing an international part of her PhD studies in Portugal. And she has a comment. Here in Portugal, there is huge trash can in every single corner for people to give their clothes away, side by side with the actual trash. I've asked where all these clothes are going, but I couldn't find a proper answer. It seems that little part goes to NGOs, but mostly ends up in the dumping places, some of them in Global South. So disturbing. And then she sends us a picture of that.
Yeah, it really comes to my attention because because I am a Brazilian, maybe I see that trash cans and I think, oh my God, maybe there are some very good clothes in there, and I am with my little suitcase of clothes. So I always think, oh my God, maybe there's treasure in here. But besides this funny part, it's very disturbing because Portugal is not that big country, yeah? So how can people just have so much clothes to give away? It's something very disturbing for me. So maybe if you, Professor, can just give your thoughts about it, I will appreciate it.
Rosa, it's a mystery to me too, because I see them in the UK and, you know, you kind of expected people do like buy a lot here and clothes are way cheaper than they are in Greece where I'm from. But I also see them in Greece. And I come from a very small town, 60,000 inhabitants, and there are like 4 of these trash cans. And I also ask, where do these go? And you don't get a clear answer. So I only know from the work of NGOs actually that have tried to like turn this on its head and actually show where they're coming, where they're going, where the clothes are going. Because for the most part, I think what happens, and this is just trying to like investigate this mystery from like the bottom up, these clothes are sold to informal like you know, entrepreneurs. So by this I mean usually women in the global south who then take these clothes and like try to sell them in other markets, but they buy them from the provider and then they try to sell them, so they become a means of exchange. But there's an incredible campaign about, you know, the discarding of clothes by a group called the Or Foundation, I think. and they have been doing some really amazing campaigns. And they, at some point, they got, in Ghana, there's a river that you can't really swim through because of the discarded clothes from, I guess, these kinds of places. So they got an Olympian, actually, like a British Ghanaian swimmer, to try to swim that river. And they documented her journey to really, raise awareness about this, because it's so common to encounter these opportunities for being sustainable, which are very questionable.
Okay, there is Bia posted here in our chat a comment. In Brazil, dedicated spaces for collecting clothes have been installed in Renner stores, the largest clothing chain in the country.
Okay, and do we know whether these are recycled? Sometimes, a lot of the H&M, for example, does recycled fabric, so they sell back a collection with recycled cotton. Or
I know in Rio, she says no, there is no word about what they do with it, with the clothes that they gather in these places. But I know in Rio, I read a work by some scholars there from the State University of Rio de Janeiro, where I'm from, actually, that some local brands, they give away leftover clothes and materials from their production line to generally women's collectives in the slums of Rio. So these women upcycle. They take these things and they transform, and they then sell these to their own in their own local chains of commerce in the slums. So that's something, and they call themselves the rats. And the rats is like a local slang that tries to distinguish themselves from the cats. The cats is a way that it's also a slang to refer to good-looking girls or boys. They're called cats. So these collectives, they call themselves rats because they are the ones that take away these leftover materials, and they do something with it in their own terms. They're not trying to imitate what the brands from the asphalt, as they say, brands geared towards middle class and upper class consumers do, but they do their own fashion, their own thing with these materials that they are given away, that they're given. So there is this stands for empowerment, which is really questionable, but still really nice. A kind of pride movement in that.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's interesting. Interesting work by Ricardo and Freitas and João Maia from UERJ, if you want to have a look, people. Very good. As ratas. Anything else?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I am particularly, I was particularly struck by the brands, that Dutch brand that advertises as street art.
Mm-hmm.
That really bothers me. It really does. Like the thesis put forward by, there is a French author that's really, really well, broadly read in Brazil, and I really don't know why, because he's not that good. But anyway, there is one particular book co-written by him and another French local author, in which they talk about capitalism, tendency to aestheticize everything. So how aesthetics has come to play a very huge part in contemporary capitalism, but they call this artist capitalism, and that makes me freak out, because if there's something that capitalism is not and will never be, is artist or artistic. So how come they use this word? And so to have a brand imitating street art, posing their advertising as street art, to make it more palatable to their public gives me the chills, really.
I think it's why I ended up doing a PhD in the first place. I think I was really interested in, the co-optation like process. Like, what does it mean when, you have, everyone is wearing like a Che Guevara t-shirt. That's an older one now, so it doesn't really resonate. But like, what does it mean when, advertisers pretend to be like street artists?
Yes.
And it's just, I mean, I see it everywhere. Once you see it, you can't really unsee it. But with Oatly, this is such a particular brand because, they definitely play on the fact that they're selling vegan milk. So they're like, we're a very like environmentally like sustainable company. And we are, in fact, they present themselves as an activist brand. They do like put forward that argument, which is a contradiction of sorts. They produce campaigns, like advertising campaigns, that have recently been like criticized by the Advertising Standards Authority in the UK as greenwashing, because they really like say, we're going to save the world. And it's like, okay, relax. You're a company, you're selling milk, it's good, but like you don't need to, but they're like very dubious when it comes to like, if you do a political economy approach to Oatly, they're connected to Trump, actually. And they're like, I found this, I didn't know this, but I found this when I was a little bit for this presentation. They're actually also connected to a Brazilian infrastructure company called Hidrovias, that I don't know, that has been accused of having links to deforestation in the Amazon.
Wow.
So environmentally
nice
cautious. Yeah, I mean, their advertising is very ecological, let's say, but their actual like, partnerships are very, very questionable.
Exactly. And this, what happens backstage with brands and institutions is usually something that we're not meant to see, we're not meant to know about. It's hard to know about what happens in the background, what connections they have, what happens in the labor chains and stuff like that. So more and more, it gets difficult for individual consumers to be aware of what's going on, because everything is done so as to shield us from this, from the knowledge of what goes on behind the scenes, whether it's advertising or industry itself. And that's really worrying, worrisome, at least.
Yes, and it's, if you look at the fashion revolution movement, for example, they're trying to like change that and basically have a campaign to promote transparency in the fast fashion industry. So they're asking consumers to, tweet or like post on Facebook a message wearing their clothes inside out so they can see the label and saying, who made my clothes? And it's, it's important because it's increasing that kind of like transparency. But then it's also, once you start thinking of how then certain brands promote the transparency that they want to promote, but not the transparency that they don't want you to see. You know what I mean? When they're like showing you something, but like holding something else like hidden, then it becomes difficult because we can't save the world as consumers. Like that, we know. I think, we might think that at times we might have a little bit of influence on how things work, but like we can't. We're not going to do it like that, because the name of the game is promotion, and promotion is like, it employs like very creative, very intelligent people that work for brands and generally, like, you know, are doing good things, but you know, they're not always interested in going somewhere where the consumer is going to feel uncomfortable. Like, why did the Lacta like advertising campaign not have any homosexual couples in bus stops?
Exactly.
The whole campaign was about that. Because they knew that they would be boycotted by, like, you know, a majority of people, and they didn't want to lose their consumer base.
Exactly.
There's a lot of these regressive campaigns. We see them like around the world of brands being targeted because they're trying to be a little bit more inclusive. So then they're attacking family life. They're like polluting the minds of our children, and it's very controversial.
Exactly. Well, I think I speak for everybody here in saying that yours has been a really, really wonderful talk. I'm very, very glad that you accepted our invitation and that you could be here with us this morning. I know it's afternoon for you over there. It's been really productive. We don't have that many um, works in academia that focus on the political side of consumer culture or promotional culture. And so to us, to our studies, it's really a very welcome contribution. And I hope you will be sending us that article you promised so that we can publish in our journal. Yes, Gloria, Bia and I have been taking pictures since everybody opened the camera. So I think we're all set with pictures. I even took one
Lovely.
of our speaker.
It was a real honor, and thank you very much. And I wanted to say, like, please feel free, like everyone who came, to send me an email, like share your thoughts, make a connection. Maybe we can, you know, think about things to do in the future together. It would be, really lovely to continue the conversation.
All right. Thank you very, very, very much. And well, that's it.